Hello and welcome to Mythmakers. Mythmakers is the podcast for fantasy fans and fantasy creatives, brought to you by the Oxford Centre for Fantasy. My name is Julia Golding, and today I am joined by a friend to the Oxford Centre for Fantasy and also a friend to all things Tolkienian, C.S. Lewis and much in between. That is Malcolm Guite. And for those of you who are watching us on YouTube, will see that Malcolm is following in Tolkien and C.S. Lewis's footsteps, and Gandalf and Bilbo. He's smoking a rather splendid pipe. So welcome, Malcolm.
Hello, Julia. Nice to see you again, and thanks for having me on this podcast, which I enjoy.
So we've summoned you back because you have just published a fantastic, it's sort of a metrical story called Galahad and the Grail, with illustrations by Stephen Crotts. So it's a lovely book. In just a hold, it's a lovely book. But you are at the beginning of a retelling of Arthurian tales, and you have chosen to go in on Galahad for your Arthurian epic. So we've known you as a poet, and we've known you as a literary critic, and we've known you as someone who writes thought pieces and essays. So how did Arthur nibble away at you and get you wanting to tell his story?
Well, I can probably answer that question best in verse. This is the prelude to the poem, but this is pretty much how it happened. People think I'm being metaphorical, but I'm not.
Okay, let's go on the adventure with you then.
So, as I walked out one morning, all in the soft, fine rain, it seemed as though a silver veil was shining over hill and vale, as though some lovely, long-lost spell had made all new again. And through that shimmer in the air, I seemed to hear a sound, as though a distant horn were blown in some lost land that I had known, that seemed to speak from tree and stone and echo all around. And with the music came these words: "Poet, take up the tale. Take up the tale, this land still keeps. In earth and water, magic sleeps. The dryad sighs, the naiad weeps. You can lift the veil. From where the waves wash Cornwall's caves out to the White Horse Vale, the lands still hold the tales of old, like hidden treasure, buried gold. Once more the story must be told. Poet, take up the tale. Tell of the king who will return. Tell of the Holy Grail. Tell of old knights and chivalry. Tell of the pristine mystery of Merlin's Isle of Gramarye. Poet, take up the tale. Take up the tale of courtesy. Take up the tale of grace. Revive the land's long memory. Summon the fair folk. Let them be. Something of fairy, wild and free, still lingers in this place. Lift up your eyes to see the light on Glastonbury Tor. Then come down from that far green hill to where the sacred waters spill and shine within the chalice well, and listen to their lore. Yea, listen well before you start. Be still ere you begin. See through the surface round about, the noise, the rush, the fear, the doubt. Though modern Britain lies without, fair Logres lives within. You may yet walk through Merlin's Isle by oak and ash and thorn. The ancient hills do not forget, and you might wake their wisdom yet. Who knows what wonders might be met on this midsummer morn? So I have taken up the tale to tell it full and free, the tale that makes my heart rejoice. I tell it, for I have no choice. I tell it till another voice takes up the tale from me.
Well, sitting here in the White Horse Vale, I particularly appreciate the nod to my local landmark.
Well, it's a nod not only to the White Horse Vale, but the kind of most recent example, at least for me, is that works of telling a story in this ringing, singing ballad form is, in fact, Chesterton's Ballad of the White Horse. So there was a little nod there.
Yeah, so that takes me to the first question I sort of had for you, which is I love the long tales of Arthur. I've read most of the sources that you've probably read, but I couldn't think of anything really much after. Well, Charles Williams is a little bit on his own, but let's say, sort of Tennyson, really, as
Yeah.
opposed to retellings for kids. I'm thinking about more in the sort of poetic form. What did you feel like answering that call to stop, think, and then
Yeah.
start to tell the tale again?
Well,
And how did you persuade a publisher to go with you?
well, yes, indeed. I mean, well, first of all, I've wanted to do this for years and years and years, ever since my mother told me the stories when I was little. But I was, in fact, mentioning Charles Williams and those kind of high modernist lyric cycles of Taliesin through Logres, and I was a bit daunted. I knew I didn't want to do the big Tennysonian blank verse thing. I think the problem is my problem was form, really. I knew I wanted it to be poetry. But Tennyson, A, it had already been done, and B, I think after Milton, it's almost impossible to write a long blank verse poem without kind of blundering into kind of ponderous sub-Miltonics. It's just been done so well by Milton. You can't get out from under his shadow, as Eliot observed. So I had a problem with form. I mean, I love David Jones, but then again, this is very high modernist prose poetry that's kind of an absolute thicket of footnotes everywhere in 4 or 5 languages, and I didn't want it to be recherche like that. Eventually, I realized the answer was staring me in the face. That I'd written a long meditation and reflection on Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner in a book called Mariner, in which, of course, I just looked at how he took the common ballad form and turned it into this really delicate instrument. He kept its vividness and its directness and its repetitions and its strong rhythm, but he would occasionally extend the stanza or shorten it or do various things that heightened the effect. And so I just thought, I think I'll have a go in the ballad form and make it much more accessible. My original plan was to do a combination of prose and poetry. I thought I'd do it as a travelogue around Great Britain with a prose narration in the modern day, the surface roundabout, and then invoke each Arthurian place in poetry and have the place so the matter of Britain was like literally the matter, the physical matter of Britain. But then I thought that's too tricksy and postmodern and double narrative. I just don't. I'm really going for a second naivete here. I think I'm done with that. I really think we need wonder and enchantment, and that was the other side of it, of course, because the word chant is inside the word enchantment, and I think I wanted this. I have a little note at the beginning saying, "Read this aloud," and then you'll get it. So anyway, persuading a publisher. Now there you put your finger on something, because I mean you're right. Tennyson is the last really long treatment of this as an epic poem in 12 books. So we're talking 1850s and 1860s. There is a rather extraordinary little book in between in the 20th century by John Heath Stubbs called Arthurian, which is in 12 books in varied metrical forms. But they're little books. I mean, it's one, fairly slim volume. And unfortunately, I mean, it's full of brilliant things, but unfortunately, also like T.H. White, he can't resist being satirical or ironic. And I just wanted no satire or irony anywhere in this. I wanted it to be cleansed of that. We've had more than enough of that. So this is the first really big retelling. So, I mean, they say to publishers or anything, you're supposed to have what they call a USP, a unique selling point. So my unique selling point was this hasn't been done for the last 150 years. But I had to point out that might also be the unique sinking point, in that there might be a reason for that. But I was willing to bet that the time might be right for this kind of retelling again, the sense of the need for re-enchantment, lots of things coming together. And I thought literally nobody else is going to do this. I've spent, decades learning the art and craft of metrical writing and use of rhyme without torturing the syntax and that kind of thing. I mastered the sonnet, which is obviously a much shorter form, but I thought if I don't do it, nobody will. And if I don't do it now, starting as the thing says on that midsummer morn when I did indeed walk out one morning, I'm not going to finish it because, I'm in my 60s. So it was now or never. And I decided to go for it. And unfortunately, Rabbit Room in America totally got what I was doing, and were going to do it beautifully. I mean, I think they sent you an advanced reader's copy, which is paperback, but the real thing is hardback and glorious. And then, obviously, I didn't want to write a British epic without it being published in Britain as well. So I got Rabbit Room and Canterbury Press into conversation with each other, and then Canterbury Press jumped on board as well. So I ended up with two publishers, taking a chance on me, as ABBA would say. Um,
Yeah, I didn't pick up any other ABBA references
no, that's okay.
amongst the network of references. But
Yeah.
in that little
ABBA
introduction,
was a reference to the rhyme scheme of In Memoriam, ABBA, but there you go.
in the little prelude extract you just read, there is actually a sort of reference to a very current theme. So, and there's a beautiful part of the episode, sort of the episodic adventure that Galahad goes on, which is about repairing the land, renewal,
Yeah.
refreshing the rivers, the kind of stories that you see in the press every
The
day.
healing of the wasteland, yeah.
Mm. So there's a sort of modern applicability, but we're
Yeah, in fact, I've just been reading. I mean, I had already started. In fact, I'd already written the sort of probably the most. I try not to be overtly allegorical, but there is one episode called Galahad and the Nine, which is very much about rivers and
yeah.
civilization and things. And I wrote that before I got Robert Macfarlane's "Is a River Alive?" But it is pretty topical actually. And in fact, I sent that to him. Because we know each other slightly.
Yeah, so for people outside the UK, Robert Macfarlane is a well-known, beautiful prose writer about landscape and travel. Fantastic.
One of the great nature writers of our age, I think.
Yeah. And the reference here is to the ongoing debate in this country about what's happened to our rivers and the lack of investment in keeping them clean. Even places that look clean, there are dead rivers because of too much nitrates and things. So it's a very hot topic here, as it probably is in many other countries. So as I've sort of mentioned, I heard all sorts of echoes as I went through, and I sometimes would note them when they were really strong, when the antennae picked up something very strong. I noted it in the margins, but obviously there were some Tolkienian moments, and there was some C.S. Lewis moments, and there was Milton, there was Coleridge, Tennyson, and other, obviously Mallory and the further back sources. So, how did you cope with this? I don't know, the anxiety of influence or whatever it is we're
Yeah.
supposed to call it?
Well, I don't. I mean, I don't believe in that whole literary critical line about the anxiety of influence, which sets the whole of literary life in the endeavour of competition.
Okay. Yeah.
Remember the name of the great literary critic who does all that? The name has temporarily escaped me. American critic who wrote The Anxiety of Influence. Anyway, I've read those books, but I don't go along with them. I think we are in the realm of creative collaboration. I think, people say, "Are you afraid of the blank piece of paper when you sit down to write?" And for me, as a poet in the full square English tradition, there is no blank piece of paper. There's a long, beautiful conversation which I've been listening to for years, and which I now have the temerity to chip into and join occasionally. So, and Eliot brilliantly says in his essay on tradition and the individual talent that although we have to perceive, at one sense, writers coming in a chronological order, that's mere historicity. In fact, because we don't necessarily read writers in chronological order, they're all contemporary to our minds. He says they also have a simultaneous order, and everything that anybody writes kind of subtly affects what everybody else writes. Now, Eliot, of course, takes that to the nth degree in a thing like The Wasteland, which the problem is that you don't get it. If you don't really get the fullness of it until you know the allusions. I didn't want to write like that. But I did want every so often to tip my cap to other writers, or to put in an allusion which will be a pleasure to anyone who gets it, but no diminishment to anyone who doesn't. So my sense must be absolutely clear as a writer. I don't think poetry is a pattern of obfuscation. I think it's meant to be lucid. Of course, it doesn't give you everything on a first reading. There's always more to find. So some of them are, just like little tips of the hat. Some of them are more significant. I mean, I have a direct quotation, for example, from the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, when Lancelot, having had his dream in which he's convicted of sin, repents and turns to Nacien. And I give him exactly the Ancient Mariner's line, "Oh, shrieve me, holy man." I mean, it works in ballad form. It works as a piece of language of that age. But I also wanted to communicate something of the transformation that's on offer from Nacien the way. And I tell you what, this was brilliant. I mean, Stephen Crotts, the illustrator, is absolutely brilliant. He's my ideal reader and illustrator, really. Like, he not only got that, but in his illustration of that moment, just as I'm quoting Coleridge, he quotes visually Dore's engraving for the Rime of the Ancient Mariner of the repentance of the mariner. So sometimes those are moments of deep connection. And I mean, sometimes it's more, there's a reason. So, for example, when Guinevere is revealing both to the young and still not, fully aware Galahad, first of all, revealing that Lancelot is his father, but also revealing her love, her guilty love for Lancelot, and asking somehow for some kind of prayer or renewal or purgation to come out of all of this. And I have, she says something like, "All I've been is caught between the dove and the fire," and I'm obviously thinking of that great passage in Little Gidding, where, we only live, only suspire, redeemed by either fire or fire, and the fire of all the medieval sources make it clear that that Galahad is the Pentecostal night. He's completely associated visually and in other ways, and he arrives on the Feast of Pentecost, and so on. So there's something about the coming of the Spirit and the redemptive but purgative qualities of the sort of flaming presence of the Spirit. I wanted, you can read that without knowing the Eliot, but if you do know the Eliot, it gives you a deeper sense of the purgation that is to come, literally a purgation by fire for Lancelot later.
I think I really like that idea that you said of, in fact, that it's not chronological, that everything is present to you as a writer. Because I sometimes find myself when I'm writing something, reaching for a moment, which is very different from a context where I may have come across it, but I suddenly see it's got the same rhythm.
Yeah.
So I lean into that thinking, I really like that, and it really works here. There's a
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
echo nod, as you said, a nod of the cap. You're not
Yeah.
copying, you're
Some
sort of
of it's just thank you,
sounding.
and it's actually saying thank you.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a double illusion. So I create a lot. I mean, obviously, I'm telling a lot of the stories as they are, but I'm also developing them. I'm looking for gaps. I'm foregrounding things that the medieval mindset didn't
Mm,
bring into the foreground. Most obviously, I'm giving lots more kind of agency and heroism to Dandrain, the Grail maiden, who, she in a sense has her own quest and has her own gifts, and I really want to make much more of her.
mm,
But I do a double tip of the cap when I tell much more of her story than is in the sources, and really bring her out as a character. And I have a bit where she's at the top of a cliff and can't get down, but she knows she has to get to the sea, and somehow from the sea to summon Solomon's ship, the Grail ship. And I have her praying for aid. And then I have a thing which is both an allusion to the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, but also specifically an allusion to Lewis's allusion to the Rime of the Ancient Mariner in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, when Lucy is at the topmast and they're going into the Dark Island, and she sees what she first thinks is a cross and then realizes it's an albatross. And the albatross flies close to Lucy. And it's the only time Lewis ever gives the voice of Aslan to anything other than a lion or a lamb. The albatross says to Lucy in that moment, "Courage, dear heart."
mm,
And I quote that directly when the albatross comes to lift my Dandrain. And that's partly saying Dandrain is my Lucy. Dandrain is the person who has natural spiritual insight and gifts. And is, Lucy is always the person to see Aslan first. And so she's, so in a way I'm saying thank you, C.S. Lewis, but in another way I'm saying to my readers who might know that story, when you're thinking of Dandrain, think of Lucy.
mm. Yeah, it's and also it's a wonderful picture. Just to go back
Oh,
to the
I
illustrations,
thought it was just fun. Why not
fantastic.
actually ride an albatross? How cool would that
Yeah,
be? You really went for that.
forget dragons. Albatross is the way to go. Much softer.
Yeah. So I
So
have her riding the albatross like a throne, and I have the albatross singing to her and telling her to sing to the sea, and I really go for it. I great
it's
fun.
it's a one of my favorite episodes because it's the poem is a poem of episodes. So if you are going to buy it and read it, it's something definitely to relish in, like little pearls, as well
Yeah.
as the narrative threads. Particularly if you're reading out aloud, because it's quite hard to sit and read the whole thing in
So
one.
it's divided into obviously this book volume is divided into 3 books, but each book is divided
Yeah,
into what I call staves, partly borrowing from Dickens' use of that term in A
yeah.
Christmas Carol. But Dickens, of course, is borrowing from the ballad tradition that a ballad is divided into staves.
So one of the things I was thinking about as I was reading it is one of the problems that Galahad gives a writer is that he is known as the perfect knight. He is pretty much almost, well, he's very Christ-like, isn't he? And we are also told, because of the nature of the sort of prophetic feel of the piece, that he's going to achieve the quest. But yet we also have to be in the midst of the adventure,
Yeah.
feeling that he's going to lose and there's going to be some jeopardy. What did you do about that? Or how did you
So, you
approach
have
it?
to keep all the prophetic stuff, but I did, so you kind of know, plot spoiler, this is Galahad, he achieves the Grail. But I do think I think there is danger. I think there is genuine jeopardy, uh, because they're all told before they set off by Nacian that this will work if they win through, if they stay true, that they all have trials and temptations to deal with and possibilities, just as Christ has the temptations in the wilderness. Now, the specific place where I make that really clear is when they're getting towards the end of the wasteland. Each of the 3 knights has a different kind
Yeah.
of trial, which is particular to their calling. So Percival is tried because he's in love with Blanchefleur, and part of his story is that he will meet Blanchefleur again in the Grail castle. So his trial is the temptation to despair of love, to be told that love is nothing but lust, to be introduced to kind of corroded forms of love in the person of this particular kind of ice demon. And uh, Galahad's trial comes when they go into a kind of, it's a bit of a Minds of Moria thing, really. They get into this dark sort of passage, and he suddenly he turns back and tries to use the key to get them out of them, and it doesn't work. And he then has complete despair, and his despair is about having failed as a leader. And he's younger than the other knights ridden near him, partly say he's just a lad, Sir Bors says he's just a lad. And so this is the great challenge of the growing boy becoming a man, as to what it is to be trusted by other people and to be trustworthy. So I do introduce a piece of genuine hazard, and I have to have Bors who, actually help Galahad get himself back together again and tell him, no, you've misunderstood. You must go forward, not backwards, and sort of fair forward voyages. So I did a little bit of that. The other thing which I thought might bring some interest to Galahad is there is, as it were, a spiritual kinship between Galahad and Dandrain from the get-go. At
Mm.
various points, I cross-reference what's happening to them when she has her sort of kind of spiritual ordination to go forward is just when he's being knighted. And there is a kind of almost, I don't want to go too far down a Charles Williams or even a Yeats road down here, but there is a kind of spiritual man. They're both pure, they're both chaste, they both represent the sort of lost virtues of chastity, considered as a positive rather than a mere negation, in the way that, say, Milton and others did, mystically. But precisely that setting aside of the whole appetitive part of sex allows for a new and deeper spiritual intimacy, which is kind of untrammeled. And so there is a kind of spiritual bond between the two of them, and I have them together at the end. So I wanted to see how I could develop that, how I could develop, a story of that intimate spiritual friendship, and offer that my readers as a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, another defense is, if you're setting out to write a romance, you know that they're gonna live, well, sort of happily ever after, some sort of couple, Elizabeth and Darcy. There's gonna be some resolution at the end, and it's the journey to get there that's where you suspend your sort of awareness of the likely
Well,
outcome.
of course, I have the tragedy of the death of Dandrain now partway through the story. So.
Yes, exactly. So there are surprises, even though you may feel it's all foretold.
Yeah,
It
but
doesn't.
I know people do find Galahad very sort of, it's like painting white on white. You can't see the outlines of the character, and I did try to address that, but I think that's partly why I think all the narrators, they never have Galahad on his own, except perhaps at the very end. The tradition of the three Grail knights is very strong.
Yes, because he's almost
Contrasting
impossibly
characters
ideal,
like
isn't
Bors
he?
and Percival, and then of course
Yeah.
we bring Lancelot in as well, so that gives us enough variety to be.
I really like Lancelot. I mean, he is that bit of human failing that you kind of need.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, interestingly, the feedback I've had so far is quite a lot of people have told me that one of the things that moved them most was the kind of crisis and repentance of Lancelot, and they felt that
Mm.
really humanized him.
So you've made it clear that the communion is the center of this Grail quest, which of course it always has been. But I also loved your echo of something that appears in a Charles Williams novel, War in Heaven, which is where the Grail itself isn't really that important. The Grail matters when people are using it for the purpose it's been set aside for.
Exactly, exactly.
So that's what makes it
Yeah.
holy, not
So, well,
some
I should
physical thing.
acknowledge a big debt to Charles Williams here. And it turns out, in the end, it wasn't the Charles Williams Arthurian poetry that I was indebted to. I decided to take a different path, except for bringing Taliesin in, which I do very strongly in the
Yeah.
second book. But here's what I owe Charles Williams. First of all, he was going to write this book, The Figure of Arthur, and he died
Mm.
before he completed it. So Lewis published Arthurian Torso, which has what his Arthur book was up to that point. I think it's a brilliant survey of the material, and it's a huge vindication of the fact that these medieval poets intended this to be the Grail, and it wasn't just a pagan thing with a light Christian gloss.
Mm.
It was a pagan thing meeting the gospel and being transformed and radically. He says time and again in that prose piece that Camelot exists for the Grail and not the other way around. And he specifically critiques Tennyson for making the Grail into a kind of unfortunate side quest for religious types that ends up just draining everybody off from Camelot. He's much more
Yeah.
interested in forming the kind of late 19th century Christian gentleman and go out and run the empire. And he sees the kind of Grail as a bit of a distraction. So Williams resists that with full force, and I'm with him 100% there. But the second debt is specifically to the novel you mentioned, War in Heaven, which is a fascinating novel because it's set in what was for Williams his own contemporary time. So it's more like Eliot showing that or Joyce, that the fundamental mythic pattern can reassert itself again and again in modern circumstances. So he has three Grail knights. They're not called Galahad, Percival, and Bors, but they are the equivalent of it, and so on. Now, the great challenge for me, the thing that actually, quite apart from the difficulty of persuading a publisher to do this, the thing that held me in awe and held me back and daunted me was precisely this question of the achievement of the Grail, the apotheosis at the end when the veil is lifted from the Grail. How can I rise to that? Have I got enough spiritual insight to even begin to do it? Now, Williams in War in Heaven does an absolutely brilliant thing, because when they have the Grail Mass, as it were, his three protagonists all give their own account of it. And the Anglican guy hears it as Book of Common Prayer, and the Roman Catholic guy hears it as the Latin Mass.
Mm.
So they all get something of it, but they each get something of it, but the whole of it is not, they have to hear each other's version of it. So I did that. Then that really helped me at the moment when I give you what Percival saw, what Bors saw, and then I finally give you Galahad's view, which includes both of them. That was very So I felt, Williams, I mean, I'm very keen on Williams, and Williams was a sort of uh, more of a benign influence at the ideas and structure level rather than, as with almost all the other poets I directly quote, at that sort of echo conversational level.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I find the actual reading of a Williams novel a bit stilted, but thinking about it afterwards, it's
Yeah,
full of riches for me.
exactly so. Exactly so. They're
Mm.
flawed novels, but he had brilliant ideas. I mean, the execution isn't always great. They're clunky in places, and frankly, they're really weird. You have to be in the mood for weird to read.
They are. They are really weird. That was another way of describing him. Is a very weird inkling.
Yeah, yeah,
Indeed.
yeah. Well, I mean, was it Serena Higgins? I think calls him the oddest inkling.
Yeah. Yeah. So you were talking about not taking anything from him in terms of form, and you touched on this decision early on that you're going to use the ballad form, and mentioned how the Ancient Mariner had sort of helped you navigate when you were setting off with a long ballad like this. If you look at the sort of Percy's Relics or something, the ballads that come out are in the dum dum. They're the same all the way through, with perhaps
Yeah,
a little refrain. That's just how they were done as a song. But yours isn't like that at all. So, was this something you composed whilst walking, or did you declaim it? How did you get
yeah.
that sort
That
of
thing. Well, you
feeling,
put
as
your
it were?
mind into it. Certainly, your mind sinks. So, first of all, ballads go back a long way with me because my mother constantly recited poetry, including ballads, and also sometimes sang them. So my mother would sing "You banks and braes of Bonny
Mm,
Doon, can you bloom so fresh and fair say," but she would recite ballads. I mean, she would recite Thomas the Rhymer to me, or really quite dark ballads like the Twa Corbies, all those kind of, so
mm,
I allude to that, but the I quote it directly when we hear about the death of Percival's father and how the birds took his hair to theek their nests. I don't use a Scots dialect word there. So I had that rhythm in me quite early. Um, and as I say, I mean, my mother recited the Ancient Mariner to me many times when I was a young boy before I ever, and while we were out at sea, in fact, so before I ever read it. But I realized you can't do a long poem in, strictly four stress, three stress, four stress, three stress, end of stanza, rhyme, A, B, C, B, even if you have the odd internal rhyme. So I noticed that Coleridge extends the stanza every so often and adds more internal rhymes and chimes. And then I saw, and Chesterton uses one of those extended forms for Ballad of the White Horse, but then he doesn't vary it. So I thought I'm going to vary it, but I'm also going to let myself go occasionally when I'm trying to lift you and I'm really trying to enchant you. I'm going to do long strings of chimes, rather like Tennyson does in Charlotte, but even more. One of the most beautiful, I mean, I used to ask myself when I started reading contemporary poetry in the 70s because I wanted to be a poet, and it was just flat, dull, chopped prose. I thought, what happened? Where did all the good stuff go? And the answer was, of course, it went onto records. It was being done by Dylan and Leonard Cohen and people like that. So there's a great bit in about the experience of that kind of chiming rhyme in Dylan's Mr. Tambourine Man, which is very much about the kind of rhyming poet. So I don't remember the lines where he goes, "If you hear vague traces of skipping reels of rhyme to your tambourine in time, I wouldn't pay it any mind. It's just a ragged cloud behind. It's just a shadow you're seeing that he's chasing." And then that enchants you. So you're ready at that great moment in the song to dance beneath the diamond sky with one hand waving free, silhouetted by the sea, circled by the circless sands, but with all memory and fate driven deep beneath the waves. I mean it. So I occasionally, and particularly when I want to heighten things, I'll expand the four line very often to six, but I'll sometimes expand it to 10 if I really want to do something distinct. And I think that, and then the other times I'll keep it absolutely tight in my 7-part story, which is completely original. It's not in the material of Galahad and the Naiad. I keep the form very strictly. So I hope there's enough variety.
Would you like to read us one of those sections so we can hear it? That'd be
Yeah,
better
I
than
think
talking
one of
about
the
it.
things, as we've mentioned, is that I've really made much more of a figure out of Dundrain, um, uh, and she becomes very much a figure in her own right. And I also draw a lot out of, one of the things I love about George MacDonald is he really draws your attention to the wisdom of older women. And, we're told at one point in Mallory that one of the hermits that Percival meets is his aunt, just as we're told that this Grail maiden unnamed in Mallory is his sister. So I thought, well, what's the backstory there? And I imagined, this poor widow, her son's gone off when she didn't want him to. And then the sister gently telling her, look, your daughter has gifts too. And I imagine the two women going off into the woods to learn prayer together at the older woman's hermitess's cell. And that gave me a chance. I mean, who am I as a man to do this? But I tried to imagine this passing on of wisdom from one woman to another. And what I did was I was partly thinking about what I know about Celtic spirituality, but also I was actually channeling my inner Hildegard of Bingen. Hildegard's whole interest in nature and her belief that everything is a word from God, and that, God is speaking to us through. I put all that in. So I'll read you this bit and you'll hear me really let myself go on the on the internal rhymes here. So I'll just read you a couple of stanzas. She taught Dandrain the way of prayer, the way to still her soul, the way to woo each beast and bird, and know each creature as a word breathed into being by our Lord. For God himself is the true bard, and sings creation through his word. And Dandrain learned from all she heard, and knew each star, each stone, each bird, as parts of one great whole. By night she kept pure vigil there, and morning came too soon. For she would see the stars wheel by, and hear their music from on high, and feel their influence, and cry in ecstasy when she'd descry a sphere of silver light draw nigh. Then she would lift her eyes and spy, above the valley's chalice high, the wafer of the moon.
For those of you listening or watching this on YouTube, there's a fantastic illustration, which was one of those trompe l'oeil ideas where you can see the valley, but you can also see the chalice with the moon as the
And so
wafer.
the stem of the chalice is actually the reflection of the moon on the water.
Yeah, beautiful.
Well,
I love that.
and as soon as Stephen Crotts sent me that, like, I thought, "I've got the right guy here." Like, he
Yeah.
totally gets what I'm doing here. So, yeah, that gives you a bit of the sense of incantation, kind of enchanted incantation that I'm trying to get, but also where some of the spirituality is in the uh, poem.
So you've gone straight in at the ultimate quest, in a sense, of the Grail quest, but
Yeah, that was
this,
quite a radical decision, yeah.
yeah, this isn't the end of Arthur for you.
No,
Uh,
no,
what
no.
what what other plans do you
Yeah.
have for
So
other
so
treatments?
so here's the thing, I mean, Aristotle says in his Poetics that if you're writing an epic, you should begin in medias res, in the midst
Okay,
of
you've done that. Tick.
back. So I partly do that. But to be honest, because of that, I was so convinced by Williams that the Grail is the heart of the whole matter of Britain, that in a sense Camelot is brought into existence that the Grail might be manifest. It's not that the Grail is manifest because Camelot is, the Grail is the heart of it. So when I first, when I did walk out that Midsummer Morn, I I mean, I had some health issues. I really didn't know. I actually thought I may not live to complete this. And I also thought I'll never persuade a publisher to do the entire thing as I envisage it, in 4 volumes. Maybe I'll just have to write The Grail as a single separate volume. And then if that floats and gets a fair wind, then they'll let me do the rest. In fact, by the time I'd shown this to Rabbit Room, they just were on it. And they said, we want to do the whole thing. We want you to guarantee the whole thing. And we want to say this is 4 volumes. So I'm beginning, as it were, almost kind of 2/3 of the way through. So what's going to happen next is I mean, there is precedence for this, both, I suppose, I mean, even in the Lewis, our Narniad here, people can have happy arguments about which order to read the books in. So This is basically, this volume as you have it now is going to have 2 prequels and a sequel. So next up is going to be, we're going to go back to the coming of Arthur, and Arthur's conception and fostering, and we're going to bring him right up in that volume through the Sword in the Stone and Excalibur and the founding of the Round Table, marriage of Guinevere, the first quest of the Round Table. Then after that, there's going to be a more general Knights of the Round Table where we can bring in, Gawain and the Green Knight and Tristan and Isolde and a whole section on Morgan Le Fay and all that sort of thing. And then we'll have the final volume, which will be the passing of the Arthur and the kind of tragic outworking of the effect of Lancelot and Guinevere's adultery and so on. So, tragedy, but not complete tragedy, because the whole thing is, it's a light that's been kindled that'll never be forgotten. And of course, there is the promise of the return of Arthur. And so that's going to be the shape of it. And the second volume, Coming of Arthur, has already been finished. I'm doing the last edits, and so I'm stuck writing the appendices because I'm going to have an appendix on Merlin and one on Taliesin and one on fairy more generally. And I've got so much I want to say, I'm kind of stuck on it. I can't. Yeah, so I am hoping that by the end, 4 volumes, each with 3 books, it will be your actual 12-book epic. But also, the way I'm writing it now, when people read the backstory, I hope there'll be a certain frisson as they see what's coming, When in volume 2, in the next one that's coming out, I tell the story. It's alluded to throughout here, but I tell the story of the dolorous stroke and the wounding of the Fisher King and the wasting of the land as it happens, as it were. But they will already know how hard it was to get through the wasteland for the knights, but that the wasteland will be healed, so.
And they are marvelous stories, and I think perhaps what I find really exciting is that they have been sort of dumbed down. Isn't quite they've been simplified and
Oh,
stripped.
they have, yeah. I've seen tellings which don't mention the dolorous stroke or the wasteland at all, which seems to me to miss almost the whole point of everything.
And there's been quite a few that are sort of flavour of. I was very fond of the BBC version, which took Merlin as their main character.
The young
There was,
Merlin.
yeah, there was some lovely things in it, but it didn't really have any narrative structure to it of any sort. It was a little
I
bit
missed
like,
that, though my daughter enjoyed it.
yeah, no, we enjoyed it watching it with my kids. It was great fun, and particularly because it thinking of what a young Merlin might have been like was, and how he was sort of struggling in a kingdom which didn't like magic. That was all great. It was like a prequel, really. It concentrated on that element of his
Well, of
life.
course, Geoffrey of Monmouth tells us first about the young Merlin when he's nearly sacrificed to put his blood on the foundations of Vortigern's tower.
I don't remember them doing that in the BBC version.
I allude to that in various ways.
They
At
missed
some
the trick
point,
there.
probably in book 4, I'm going to have Taliesin tell Merlin's backstory, long after Merlin has departed from the narrative. But we're going to, it's called Merlin's Isle. I've got to keep bringing Merlin in one way or another.
Yes. Well, Malcolm, it's always such a huge privilege and pleasure to talk to you. Particularly, I love hearing you read your own verse. I always ask my guests to expand their minds beyond their own world that they're working in, but take an element into other fantasy worlds. And I thought it would be fun to ask you, and I'll have a think about this myself, where would be the best place to go on a quest for the Grail? Thinking about the Grail as an element that's for all time in all places. Um, Obviously, Indiana Jones has already done it, but where would you go for a
Where
quest?
would I take it? Well, if it was going to take it into the realm of another great, mythopoeic writer,
Yeah, exactly.
I think I would be with C.S. Lewis and with Reepicheep and all the others on the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, my favorite of the Narnian Chronicles, partly because of the ship. In fact, although the only mention of Arthur by name is in Prince Caspian, when the kids come back and he says it's like Arthur was coming back for the Narnians, and I say that some say he will, and I say the sooner the better, says Lewis. But actually, at the deepest level, there's all kinds of Grail motifs going on. They're going closer and closer to the utterly holy, Reepicheep is finally on a quest, for Aslan's country, which he's been prophesied as a, over him as a babe, that he would make this quest. He is the kind of the good knight. I mean, and he's totally chivalric. And of course, Pauline Baines gets it all. And then when they finally get to Aslan's table, it's Reepicheep who picks up a chalice. Obviously, it's not the Grail, but you have the image of the good knight who will leave all the companions behind and go into the heart of heaven itself. And there he is holding a chalice on the table. I mean, so I could imagine another voyage of the Dawn Treader, as it were, in which, I would sail, with various chosen heroes, and the Dawn Treader would become the Grail ship. And that would suit me absolutely fine.
Yeah, so I think one of the problems about thinking about the Grail quest in other contexts is because it is specifically about Christ and Christ's sacrifice, that sometimes dropping it into another world,
Oh yeah, it wouldn't. I mean, yeah,
it kind of deletes it, doesn't it? Because I was thinking it would be really interesting to sort of have it as a plot in Doctor Who or something. I don't
Oh
think
yeah,
it would work.
exactly. That was the trouble with. I mean, that's why, I mean, I haven't seen the Indiana Jones thing, and nor have I seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail. For me, it's just too sacred. I just don't want to go.
Yeah.
But yeah, because it is, it is the meeting of heaven and earth in and through the body and blood of Christ. So it's like massive thing. In that sense, you can't. But you can still, the humility of Christ is the humility. I mean, one of the, in coming in anything form at all, let alone, simply this chalice. I mean, I rather love in War in Heaven with the Williams, where, the Holy Grail turns up just in the cupboard of a parish church.
Yeah.
And the best thing there is that he makes the hero an archdeacon, probably the single most unglamorous role you can have one of the things archdeacons' visitations are is for checking the silverware of parish churches and making sure they're all there. And he takes that totally mundane thing and makes it a Grail quest. It's fantastic.
You might not dislike the Indiana Jones version
Yeah.
because though it has some slightly Monty Python-esque elements at the end with the way they did their knight who's been guarding this thing forever, but it was in Petra.
Oh,
So,
really? That would be worth seeing, Petra.
and of course, there's loads of goblets all lined up, and you have to choose the one. It's like that Merchant's Tale,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Merchant of Venice
Merchant of
choice.
Venice. Yeah, yeah.
Don't choose the one diamond encrusted. You choose the battered.
Don't choose the bling. Yeah, yeah. No, no,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So, I mean, you might quite like it. It's not too bad. And it's sort of reverential about the sort of religious context of it.
Oh, is
Uh,
it? Oh, well, that's good one.
yeah. So not a complete disaster from that point of view. But yeah, so I think I've only come up with places I wouldn't put it. So I have to go and think about that a bit more. Thank you so much, Malcolm. And for those of you who now want to rush out and get your copy of Galahad and the Grail, if you're in the US, look up Rabbit Room. Is that
Yeah.
the?
Yeah,
I'm sure
Rabbit
it's.
Room Merlin's Isle. They've got a whole site about it. And they've done a really cool thing, actually. They're recognizing that book clubs and book groups might want to do this. And they've created a whole free sort of set of resources, including like dramatizing the wasteland section. You can read out in parts, and even like coloring sheets for kids that might be hanging around the book group. And their suggestion is that, some book groups you read the chapter and then you discuss it, but in others you read out loud to each other, and they think this would really work well for that. So they're in the States. And then here in England, it's good old Canterbury Press, my usual poetry publisher, and they've got it. And in both cases, it's a wonderful, solid hardback with, as I say, these beautiful illustrations. I love books physically as objects, and I
Yeah.
find it to be a beautiful object, and it really is.
Yeah. So that makes it a great present as well. So,
Yeah, yeah.
for yourself or for someone else. So thank you very much, Malcolm. And we look forward. Have you got a title for part 2, the Coming of Arthur one?
Yeah, it's called The Coming of
Oh,
Arthur.
well, there you go.
Yeah, and that'll be out in November, I think, so quite soon. And then the final two will be one in 27 and one in 28. My aim is to have finished writing it all before I turn 70, and I'm 68 now.
Okay, so that's the goal.
But
That's the
anyway, it's
quest.
nice to talk to you again. I much enjoyed our collaboration together on our Lent book,
Yes, wardrobes and
Wardrobes and
rings.
Rings.
Yes.
I rather miss those trips to Oxford.
Yes, so we must if you didn't catch it this Lent, everybody, and there will be another Lent coming around. So look up Wardrobes and Rings, which includes Malcolm, myself, and Simon Horobin, sort of picking sort of lovely moments from Tolkien or C.S. Lewis or their influences and connecting them to Lent and to the Easter story. Anyway, thank you very much, Malcolm, and thank you very much for introducing us to Galahad and the Grail.
Thanks, a pleasure. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Thanks for listening to Mythmakers podcast, brought to you by the Oxford Centre for Fantasy. Visit oxfordcenterforfantasy.org to join in the fun. Find out about our online courses, in-person stays in Oxford, plus visit our shop for great gifts. Tell a friend and subscribe wherever you find your favourite podcasts worldwide.